The ink wasn't even dry on the divorce papers when Marcus Sterling flashed that winning smile. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime, dumping the boring wife who supported him when he was nothing, to replace her with a younger model the second his company hit the Fortune 500. He walked out of that courtroom thinking Clara was worthless, leaving her with nothing but her late father's run-down shack. But Marcus forgot one crucial detail. Clara's father wasn't just a poor gardener. He was a man with a secret buried in a will that would turn Marcus's victory into a nightmare within 48 hours. Watch until the end, because the revenge in this story is the definition of poetic justice. The air conditioning in the conference room of Latham & Watkins in downtown Chicago was set to a freezing 65 degrees, but Clara felt like she was burning up. Across the mahogany table sat Marcus Sterling, the man she had loved for 12 years, the man she had worked 2 jobs to support while he built his tech empire, Sterlo Dynamics. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking his platinum Rolex, tapping his fingers impatiently against the polished wood. "Clara, we don't have all day," Marcus said, his voice smooth but laced with that new arrogance he had developed over the last 2 years. "My driver is waiting. Just sign the papers. It's exactly what we agreed on. You get the Honda, your personal items, and the emotional freedom you've been crying about." Clara's hand trembled as she held the Mont Blanc pen. Beside her, her lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Sarah Jenkins, looked tired. "Mrs. Sterling, I still advise against this. You are entitled to a share of the company. You were there at the incorporation." Waiving alimony entirely as, "I just want out, Sarah," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I just want him out of my life." Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. "See? She's being sensible for once. Listen, Sarah, Clara knows she didn't contribute to the business. She made sandwiches. She didn't write code. She didn't close deals in Tokyo or London. She was a domestic comfort. And now our paths have diverged." He leaned forward, his expensive cologne, a scent Clara used to buy him for Christmas, now replaced by something musky and unfamiliar, wafting across the table. "Sign it, Clara. Don't make this ugly. You know you can't afford a prolonged legal battle. I'll bury you in paperwork until you're living in your car. Or, you signed this, walk away with your dignity, and go live in that rotting shack your father left you." The mention of her father, Henry Caldwell, stung worse than the divorce. Henry had died 3 weeks ago. A heart attack. He had been a quiet, simple man who loved gardening and old books. Marcus had refused to even pay for the funeral, claiming his assets were tied up in a merger, forcing Clara to drain her small savings account to bury him. "Don't speak about my father," Clara said, her voice gaining a sudden steeliness. "He was a gardener, Clara." "A hermit," Marcus scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. "He died with $40 in his bank account. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You're destined for mediocrity. I'm just accelerating the process." Clara looked at the papers. Dissolution of marriage, waiver of assets. She thought about the late nights she spent folding flyers for his first startup. She thought about the loan she took out in her name to buy his first server. She looked at his face, handsome, chiseled, and utterly devoid of humanity. She realized then that fighting him would require energy she didn't have. She was grieving. She was broken. She just wanted the noise to stop. She pressed the pen to the paper. Clara Caldwell. She dropped the Sterling immediately. "Done," she whispered. Marcus snatched the papers before the ink could dry. He handed them to his high-priced attorney, Arthur Pendleton, who smirked. "Excellent," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "The house keys, Clara." I have until the weekend to move out. according to the agreement, Clara stammered. Actually, Arthur Pendleton interjected, sliding a secondary document forward. Clause 4B states that upon signature, the marital residence is vacated immediately to prevent damage to property. You have 24 hours to retrieve personal effects. Security will be present. Clara felt the room spin. 24 hours? But where will I go? Marcus was already at the door, typing a text message on his phone, a smile playing on his lips that had nothing to do with business. Go to your daddy's shack in the woods, Clara. Marcus threw over his shoulder without looking back. It fits you. And hey, try not to starve. He slammed the heavy glass door. Clara sat alone in the freezing room, the silence deafening. She was 34 years old, divorced, homeless, and penniless. But as she stared at the empty chair Marcus had occupied, she didn't know that the text message he had just sent was to a woman named Jessica, confirming that the pest was gone. And she certainly didn't know that miles away, in a dusty law office in Vermont, a different kind of document was being stamped, one that concerned the poor gardener, Henry Caldwell. The drive to the Sterling estate in Lake Forest was a blur of tears and rain. Clara drove her 2018 Honda Civic, the only thing she truly owned, up the winding driveway lined with the oak trees she had planted herself 5 years ago. When she pulled up to the mansion, a sprawling, modern glass and steel structure that had been featured in Architectural Digest, her stomach dropped. There was a moving truck in the driveway, a luxury moving truck, and there was a red Porsche 911 parked right where her Honda usually went. Clara turned off the ignition and stepped out into the drizzle. Before she could even reach the front steps, the heavy oak double doors swung open. It wasn't Marcus. It was a woman. She looked to be about 24. She was wearing a white cashmere sweater that Clara recognized. It was from a boutique in Paris Marcus had visited last month for business. She had blonde hair falling in perfect waves, and she was holding a glass of champagne. This was Jessica Vane. Clara knew the name. She was the new marketing intern Marcus had hired 6 months ago, the one he said was bright and full of potential. "Oh," Jessica said, feigning surprise. She took a sip of the champagne. "You must be the ex-wife. Marcus said you'd be coming by to pick up your junk." Clara felt a physical blow to her chest. "This is my house until tomorrow morning, Jessica. What are you doing here?" Jessica laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "Honey, didn't you read the papers? Marcus transferred the deed to a holding company last week. And guess who manages the residential assets of that company? Me. I'm moving in. Today." Jessica stepped aside, gesturing grandly to the foyer. "Be quick. I have decorators coming at 4 p.m. to get rid of this." She gestured vaguely at the warm, rustic furniture Clara had picked out. This depressing beige vibe. We're going modern, minimalist. Clara walked past her, her legs feeling like lead. She went up the floating staircase to the master bedroom. It smelled like bleach and Jessica's overly sweet perfume. Her clothes, her modest blazers, her jeans, her comfortable sweaters were already piled on the floor in black trash bags. "I had the maid pack for you," Jessica called out from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe. "To save time, we threw out the things that were, well, frankly, embarrassing. Who wears polyester blends in 2024? Clara knelt by the bags. She unzipped one. Her wedding album was in there, the cover bent. A framed photo of her and her father was face down, the glass cracked. She stood up, clutching the photo. "You can have him, Jessica," Clara said, her voice shaking but louder than before. "You can have the house. You can have the money. But you should know something about Marcus." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh, save it. You're bitter." He told me you were suffocating him. He will trade you in, Clara said, turning to face the younger woman. The moment you aren't shiny and new, the moment you need something from him, he will discard you. He doesn't love people, Jessica. He loves ownership. Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. Get your bags and get out. Marcus is coming home for a celebratory dinner tonight, and I don't want your sad energy ruining the Wagyu steaks. Clara dragged the 4 black trash bags down the stairs, one by one. Jessica watched from the landing, sipping her drink, not lifting a finger. When Clara finally loaded the trunk of her Honda, she was soaked from the rain and sweating from exertion. She looked back at the house one last time. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling window, she saw Marcus's car pull up. He got out, and Jessica ran to him. He spun her around, kissing her deeply, the kind of kiss he hadn't given Clara in 5 years. Marcus looked up and saw Clara standing by her old car. He didn't wave. He didn't look sad. He just checked his watch, pointed to the gate, and shooed her away like a stray dog. Clara got into the car, locked the doors, and screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw. Then she put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. She had nowhere to go but north, to Vermont, to the shack. She drove for 6 hours straight, leaving the city lights behind, driving deeper into the darkness of the mountains. She thought she had hit rock bottom. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The storm was just beginning, but not the kind Marcus prepared for. As she crossed the state line, her phone buzzed. It was an email from an unknown address, trustycaldwellholdings.net. The subject line read, "Urgent, regarding the estate of Henry Caldwell." Clara ignored it. She assumed it was a bill collector's for her father's medical expenses. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on the muddy road ahead, leading her toward a destiny she couldn't possibly imagine. It was 2 a.m. when Clara's headlights cut through the dense pine forest of rural Vermont. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, but she remembered the way. She and her father used to come here when she was a little girl, before her mother died, before life got complicated. The property was located at the end of a long, unpaved gravel road that threatened to swallow the Honda's tires. Finally, the structure came into view. Marcus had called it a shack, and he wasn't entirely wrong. It was a small, A-frame cabin built in the 1970s. The wood was grey and weathered. The roof was covered in moss. There was no garage, just a lean-to shed filled with rusted gardening tools. Clara parked and killed the engine. The silence of the woods was heavy, broken only by the sound of wind rushing through the pines. It was pitch black. She used her phone's flashlight to find the key under the loose stone by the porch steps, a habit her father never broke. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed like a ghost. Inside, the air was stale and cold. It smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and damp wool. The smell of her father. Clara found the fuse box and flipped the main switch. Nothing happened. The power had been cut. "Of course," she sobbed, sliding down the wall until she hit the floor. Of course he couldn't pay the bill. She wrapped herself in her coat and curled up on the dusty rug in the center of the living room. She didn't have the energy to bring in her bags. She just lay there in the dark, crying until she fell into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. She woke up to the sound of pounding. Bang, bang, bang. Clara jolted awake. Sunlight was streaming through the dirty windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She checked her phone. 8:30 a.m., bang, bang. Someone was at the door. Clara stood up, smoothing her wrinkled clothes. Panic set in. Had Marcus sent someone to harass her here? Had the bank come to foreclose on the cabin? She opened the door tentatively. Standing on the porch was a man in a sharp, charcoal-grey three-piece suit that looked ridiculously out of place in the muddy forest. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair combed back severely and wire-rimmed glasses. Behind him, parked next to her dirty Honda, was a pristine black Bentley with a driver waiting by the door. "Ms. Clara Caldwell?" the man asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, and British. Yes, I'm Clara," she said, confused. "Who are you?" The man bowed slightly. "My name is Archibald Thorne. I am the senior executor for the firm Thorne, Sterling and Associates. No relation to your ex-husband, I assure you. I have been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." Clara rubbed her eyes. "I'm sorry, I've been going through a divorce. My father. He didn't have any money. If this is about unpaid bills, I don't have anything right now." Archibald Thorne smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile like Marcus's. It was a smile of amusement, a smile that said he knew something the rest of the world didn't. "My dear Miss Caldwell," Thorne said, stepping past her into the dusty cabin without asking, looking around at the peeling wallpaper with a strange fondness. "I am not here to collect a debt. I am here to activate the protocol." "The protocol?" Clara asked, leaving the door open. "What are you talking about?" Thorne placed a leather briefcase on the rickety wooden dining table. He snapped the golden latches open. "Your father, Henry, was a man of extreme privacy. He believed that character is forged in the fire of struggle. He watched you closely these last 10 years, Clara. He watched you support a man who didn't appreciate you. He watched you work humble jobs with dignity." Thorne pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. "He also watched Marcus Sterling," Thorne added, his eyes narrowing. He knew this day would come. The divorce. The betrayal. Henry predicted it down to the month. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "My father was a gardener. He mowed lawns for the city council." Thorne chuckled softly. Henry liked gardening. It was his hobby, but it was not his profession. "Did you never wonder why your father, a gardener, made you study corporate law for 2 years before you dropped out to help Marcus? Did you never wonder how he paid for your mother's experimental cancer treatments in cash?" Clara was stunned. She had wondered, but she always assumed he had borrowed it or sold family heirlooms. "Who was my father?" Clara whispered. Thorne opened the document. Henry Caldwell was the majority shareholder and silent founder of Titanium Earth Holdings. He owned the mineral rights to 40% of the erratic earth metals used in smartphone production in North America. He also owned the land underneath the new tech district in Chicago. Clara's mouth fell open. The tech district? "Specifically," Thorne said, pointing a manicured finger at a map in the file. "The land upon which the Sterlo Dynamics headquarters is currently built. Marcus Sterling pays rent. He just doesn't know who the landlord is." Thorne looked up at Clara, his eyes twinkling. "The lease on Marcus's headquarters expires in 4 days, and according to your father's last will and testament, the ownership of the land and the decision to renew that lease now belongs solely to you." Clara grabbed the table to steady herself. "But there is a condition," Thorne said, his voice turning serious. "A condition? Yes. Your father wanted to ensure you were ready. The assets are yours, valued at approximately $850 million, providing you agree to one thing." Thorne slid a single sheet of paper forward. "You must personally deliver the eviction notice or the lease renewal to the tenant. You must look him in the eye when you do it." Clara stared at the paper. Yesterday, she was a discarded wife with a Honda Civic and a broken heart. Today, She was the woman who owned the ground Marcus Sterling walked on. Slowly, a smile spread across Clara's face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of reckoning. "Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice steady. "Do you have a pen?" Clara spent the next 4 hours in a state of suspended reality. Archibald Thorne was not merely a lawyer. He was a machine of efficiency. Within 30 minutes of Clara accepting the terms of her father's will, the cabin was swarming with activity. A satellite truck arrived to boost the internet signal. 2 junior associates from Thorne, Sterling and Associates appeared in a Range Rover with boxes of files and a catered lunch from a bistro in Burlington. "We have a lot of work to do, Ms. Caldwell," Thorne said, laying out a timeline on the rustic kitchen table. "The lease for the Sterlo Dynamics headquarters at 400 River North expires on Friday at midnight. That is exactly 72 hours from now. Marcus Sterling has been attempting to purchase the land from your father's shell company, Terra Firma LLC, for 5 years. He believes he is close to a deal with an anonymous elderly recluse." "He thought my father was just a stubborn old man," Clara murmured, reading the emails printed in the file. "Precisely. Marcus needs this land. He is currently in final negotiations to merge with Omnicorp, a Japanese tech giant. The merger is valued at $4 billion. However," Thorne tapped the paper with his pen, "a key clause in the merger agreement is secured infrastructure. If Marcus loses the lease on his headquarters, the merger collapses. His stock value will plummet to 0 overnight. He is over-leveraged, Clara. He spent millions on his lifestyle, assuming this deal would make him a billionaire." Clara looked at the numbers. Marcus was swimming in debt, hiding it behind rented Ferraris and leased penthouses, banking everything on this merger. And he needed her signature. Well, the signature of the landlord, to save his life. "He thinks I'm destitute," Clara said softly. "He told me to come here to starve." "Then let us ensure he remains ignorant until the moment of impact," Thorne said. "We need to get you back to Chicago. But not as Clara, the ex-wife. We need to introduce you as Clara, the chairman." Thorne made a phone call. An hour later, a helicopter landed in the clearing behind the cabin, blowing pine needles into a whirlwind. "Your father hated spending money on himself," Thorne shouted over the rotor noise as he guided Clara toward the aircraft. "But he authorized an unlimited budget for Project Justice. That is you, my dear." They flew directly to a private airfield outside Chicago, where a limousine was waiting. Clara was whisked to the penthouse suite at the Peninsula Hotel. Waiting inside the suite were 3 people: a stylist named Julian, a public relations crisis manager named Eleanor, and a forensic accountant named David. "We have 48 hours to erase the last 10 years of neglect," Julian said, looking Clara up and down critically but kindly. "Marcus Sterling liked you in beige and grey because he wanted you to disappear. We are going to make you visible. Painfully visible." For the next 2 days, Clara underwent a transformation that was more than skin deep. It wasn't just about the facials, the hair treatments that turned her dull brown locks into a rich, glossy chestnut, or the tailored suits that cost more than her old Honda. It was about the briefing sessions. David, the accountant, walked her through Marcus's books. Clara learned where he was hiding assets, which offshore accounts he was using to pay for Jessica's gifts, and exactly how desperate he was. "He's missed payroll twice in the last quarter," David revealed, pointing to a red column on the screen. "He covered it with personal loans. If this merger fails, he goes to prison for fraud. He's been cooking the books to look solvent for the Japanese investors." Clara felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. "He told me I was the financial drain. He told me my grocery bills were too high." "Projection," David said dryly. Classic narcissism. By Thursday evening, the night of the Sterlo Dynamics pre-merger gala, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror in the suite. She was wearing a custom-made gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves and trailed off into a train that looked like liquid night. Her hair was swept up, revealing a diamond necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, something Thorne had retrieved from a bank vault. She didn't look like the woman who had cried in the lawyer's office. She looked like a queen who had just signed a death warrant. Thorne entered the room, dressed in a tuxedo. He paused, a look of genuine pride on his face. "Your father would have been terrified of you right now," he said gently. "The car is ready." "Does he know?" Clara asked. "Does Marcus know the landlord is coming?" "He knows that the chairman of Terra Firma LLC has finally agreed to meet him at the gala to sign the lease renewal in person." Thorne smiled. "He is expecting a 90-year-old man in a wheelchair. He has prepared a bottle of vintage scotch and a box of cigars to butter him up." Clara picked up the black leather portfolio containing the eviction notice. "I hate scotch," she said. "Shall we?" Thorne offered his arm. Clara took it. "Let's go say hello to my husband." The Sterlo Dynamics Gala was the event of the season. Held at the grand ballroom of the Palmer House, Hilton, it was a sea of black ties, sequined gowns, and fake smiles. Marcus Sterling stood at the center of the room, holding court. He looked impeccable in a Tom Ford tuxedo, one hand resting possessively on the waist of Jessica Vane. Jessica was wearing a shimmering gold dress that was a little too tight and a little too loud, but she beamed, soaking up the attention. "Yes, the merger is practically a done deal," Marcus was saying loudly to a group of investors. "We sign the papers Monday. The Japanese team is flying in tomorrow. And the real estate? A formality. The owner is an old family friend. He's coming tonight to bless the union, so to speak." "I heard the owner was difficult," one investor, a skeptical man named Mr. Sato, noted. "The land rights have always been a grey area in your portfolio." "Nonsense," Marcus waved his hand, taking a sip of his martini. "I have it under control. By midnight, I'll own the ground beneath the building. I'm unbreakable." Jessica giggled. "Marcus is a genius. He talks people into anything." Just then, the music in the ballroom shifted. The live jazz band quieted down. A hush rippled through the room, starting from the entrance and spreading like a wave toward the center. Marcus frowned. "What's going on? Is the Japanese delegation early?" He turned toward the massive double doors. Archibald Thorne entered first. His severe presence and the way he carried himself commanded instant respect. He stopped and turned, extending a hand to help someone else enter. Clara stepped into the light. The room went silent. For a moment, no one recognized her. They saw a stunning woman in midnight blue, radiating power and wealth. She walked with a confident, predatory grace, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. It wasn't until she was 20 feet away that Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered, splashing gin and olives onto his patent leather shoes, but he didn't notice. "Clara?" he whispered. Jessica squinted, her smile freezing. "Is that the sandwich maker?" Clara didn't stop. She walked straight up to the circle of investors, flanked by Thorne and two large security guards. She looked at Marcus, then at Jessica, and finally addressed Mr. Sato, the Japanese investor. "Mr. Sato," Clara said, her voice smooth and projecting perfectly without a microphone. "I apologize for the interruption. I believe you were discussing the stability of the infrastructure." Mr. Sato bowed slightly, entranced. "We were, madam." "Caldwell," Clara said. "Clara Caldwell. I am the chairman and majority shareholder of Terra Firma LLC. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast he looked like a corpse. "What?" he choked out. "That's impossible. Terra Firma is owned by Henry Caldwell," Clara finished for him. "My father, who passed away 3 weeks ago. You remember him, Marcus? The gardener you wouldn't pay to bury." A murmur of shock went through the crowd. Phones were raised. The recording lights blinked on. "Clara, what is this?" Marcus hissed, stepping forward, his charm replaced by panic. "You're making a scene. You don't own anything. You signed the divorce papers. You waived your assets." "I waived my rights to your assets, Marcus," Clara corrected him, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "I didn't waive my rights to mine. And it turns out my father left me quite a bit, including the land your headquarters sits on." Jessica laughed nervously, looking around for support. "This is a joke, right? She's lying. She's crazy. Marcus, call security." "I wouldn't do that," Thorne interjected calmly. "Ms. Caldwell is the guest of honor. In fact, technically, since your company is 3 months behind on rent, according to the fine print of the original 1990 lease agreement, she is the only person with the legal right to be here. You are currently trespassing." Marcus was sweating now. He looked at Mr. Sato, who was frowning deeply. "Marcus," Mr. Sato said, his voice hard, "you told us you owned the land. You told us the lease was a formality." "It is. It is," Marcus stammered. He grabbed Clara's arm. "Clara, honey, listen. Let's go to the back room. We can talk about this. We're family, right? 12 years? Clara looked at his hand on her arm until he let go. "We aren't family, Marcus. You made sure of that on Tuesday at 11 a.m. "Look, I'm sorry about what I said," Marcus whispered, desperate, his eyes darting around the room. "I was stressed. The merger. The pressure. I still love you. Jessica meant nothing. She's an employee," Jessica gasped. "Marcus!" Clara laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and terrifying. "Oh, Marcus, you never change. Selling out the new model to try and get the old one back because the old one suddenly has a price tag." She signaled to Thorne, who handed her the black leather portfolio. "I came here tonight to handle the lease, Marcus, as requested." Marcus let out a breath of relief. He straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "Right, good. See, everyone, it's just business, a negotiation. Clara, you're smart. You know that without this building, the rent stops coming in. You need me." "That's the thing about being a Caldwell, Marcus," Clara said, opening the portfolio. "We don't need much. My dad lived in a shack. I drive a Honda. I don't need your rent money." She pulled out a single document. It wasn't a renewal. It was printed on thick red legal paper. "This is a notice of eviction," Clara announced, her voice ringing through the ballroom. "Pursuant to Clause 17 of the original land deed, I am invoking the character clause. The landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease immediately if the tenant engages in fraudulent financial activity or moral turpitude." "Fraud?" Marcus screamed. "I haven't committed fraud. We have the ledgers, Marcus," Clara said, holding up a USB drive. "My forensic team has been busy. You've been inflating revenue numbers by funneling personal loans through shell companies. It's a Ponzi scheme. And Mr. Sato, I think you should check the collateral he offered you. It's my land, which he doesn't own." Mr. Sato signaled his team. They immediately began typing on their phones, backing away from Marcus. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Marcus," Clara said, handing him the red paper. "The locks will be changed on Saturday morning. Security is already on site." Marcus stared at the paper. His hands were shaking. You can't do this. This is my life. I built this." "You built it on my back," Clara said, leaning in close so only he could hear. and you built it on my father's land. Now, I'm taking it back." Marcus looked at Jessica, but she was already backing away, vanishing into the crowd. He looked at the investors, but they were turning their backs. He was alone in the center of the ballroom, holding an eviction notice. Clara turned to leave. "Wait!" Marcus shouted, tears streaming down his face, fully breaking down. "Clara, please! I'll give you half. I'll give you everything. Just don't destroy me." Clara paused. She looked back over her shoulder, the diamonds at her neck catching the light. "You said I was destined for mediocrity, Marcus," she said. "I'm just accelerating your process." She walked out of the ballroom, leaving silence in her wake. But the night wasn't over. As Clara stepped into the cool night air where the limo waited, Thorne's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went pale. He covered the phone. "Clara, don't get in the car." "Why?" Clara asked, her adrenaline fading into confusion. "That was my contact at the precinct," Thorne said. "Marcus didn't just cook the books. He borrowed money from the wrong people to cover his tracks, the Chicago outfit. And they just found out the merger is dead." Clara looked back at the hotel entrance. A black van screeched to a halt in front of the valet. 4 men in heavy coats jumped out and ran inside. "He's going to get hurt," Clara whispered. "He made his bed," Thorne said. "No," Clara said, her eyes hardening. "He goes to prison. He doesn't get the easy way out. I want him to live long enough to see me run his company better than he ever did." Clara grabbed her phone. "Call the police, Thorne. Save him. For now." The chaos outside the Palmer house, Hilton, was a symphony of sirens. Clara stood behind the tinted glass of the limousine, watching the scene unfold like a dark movie. Thanks to Thorne's call, 6 Chicago PD cruisers had swarmed the entrance, just as the men in the black van were dragging a kicking and screaming Marcus toward their vehicle. The collectors scattered the moment the blue lights flashed, abandoning their prize. Marcus wasn't kidnapped, but he wasn't free either. Clara watched as officers handcuffed her ex-husband. He looked disheveled, his tuxedo torn at the shoulder, his face streaked with sweat and tears. He was shouting something about being a CEO, about having rights, but the officers were pushing him into the back of a squad car. He was being arrested for wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud, charges that carried a combined sentence of 20 to 30 years. "He is safe from the mob," Thorne said quietly from the seat beside her. "In federal custody, the outfit can't touch him." "You saved his life, Clara." "I didn't do it for him," Clara replied, turning away from the window as the squad car sped away. "I did it because I want him to remember. Every day he sits in a cell, I want him to remember that he's alive because of the woman he called worthless." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind that reshaped the Chicago tech landscape. With Marcus in jail and the fraud exposed, Sterlo Dynamics stock crashed. It went from trading at $140 a share to $2.30 in 48 hours. The merger with Omnicorp was dead. The employees were terrified. The board of directors was in a panic. They had no CEO. They had no money. And worst of all, they had no building. Their eviction date had passed, and Clara held the keys. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the board of directors of Sterlo Dynamics requested an emergency meeting with the landlord. They expected to meet at a law office. Instead, Clara made them come to the building they used to occupy, the one she had locked them out of. They sat in the dark boardroom. The power had been cut, just as the power had been cut at her father's shack. 12 wealthy men and women sat in their expensive suits, shivering slightly in the unheated room. When Clara entered, she was flanked by Archibald Thorne and a team of auditors. She didn't sit down. She paced at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara began, her voice echoing in the cold room. "You are trespassing, but I'm willing to listen. Mrs. Sterling, Ms. Caldwell," the chairman of the board, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, stammered. "We are facing bankruptcy. If we don't get access to the servers in the basement, the company dies. Thousands of jobs will be lost. We are begging you to renew the lease." "The lease is non-negotiable," Clara said sharply. "I don't rent to criminals. And under your watch, Marcus turned this company into a criminal enterprise." "We didn't know," a board member protested. "It was your job to know," Clara snapped. "But I care about the engineers. I care about the receptionists. I care about the people who actually work, unlike you." She signaled Thorne, who slid a thick stack of binders onto the table. "I am proposing a solution," Clara said. "I will not renew the lease for Sterlo Dynamics. However, my holding company, Terra Firma, is willing to acquire the assets of your failed company. We will buy the servers, the intellectual property, and the contracts." "Acquire us?" Henderson scoffed. "For how much? The valuation was $4 billion last week." "That was last week," Clara said coldly. "Today you have $400 million in debt and no headquarters. I am offering to buy the company for $1. $1? The room erupted in outrage. "Plus," Clara raised her voice, silencing them, "I will assume the debt. I will pay the back wages of every employee you haven't paid in 2 months, and I will keep the staff. But the board? You are all fired. Effective immediately. No severance packages. No golden parachutes." "You can't do that," Henderson shouted. "We'll sue." "Sue who?" Thorne stepped in, his voice like gravel. "The company is insolvent. You can accept the dollar and walk away without liability, or you can face the shareholder lawsuits that are coming next week on your own. Ms. Caldwell is offering you a lifeboat. I suggest you take it." The room fell silent. They looked at the shivering board members. They looked at the red ink on the ledgers. One by one they signed. As they filed out of the room, defeated, Clara walked to the window. She looked down at the city. She had done it. She hadn't just taken the house. She had taken the kingdom. "What about Jessica?" Clara asked, without turning around. "Miss Vane," Thorne said with a dry chuckle. She attempted to sell her story to a tabloid, the secret life of the billionaire's mistress. Unfortunately, since she signed a non-disclosure agreement when Marcus hired her, our legal team blocked the publication. She was last seen moving back in with her parents in Ohio. She is currently managing a spray tan salon. Clara nodded. "Good. Let her fade away." "And the company?" Thorne asked. "What shall we call it? Sterlo Dynamics is a tainted name." Clara thought about her father. She thought about the hours he spent in the garden, nurturing things that took time to grow, things that were real and lasting. "Call it Roots," Clara said. "Roots technology. Because we're going to build this the right way, from the ground up." 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. The Chicago winter had melted away, replaced by a tentative blossoming spring. The Metropolitan Correctional Center was a gray, towering monolith in the center of the city, a stark contrast to the glass and steel skyscrapers that surrounded it. Inside, the air was recycled and smelled faintly of industrial antiseptic and floor wax. It was a place where time didn't flow. It dripped. Clara sat in the private visiting booth on the 12th floor. She was no longer the woman who wore oversized sweaters to hide herself, nor was she the avenging angel in the midnight blue gown. Today, she wore a tailored, cream-colored suit, simple gold earrings, and her hair loose. She looked like a woman who was comfortable in her own skin. She checked her watch, a simple Cartier tank watch she had bought for herself. It was 2:00 p.m. The heavy steel door on the other side of the reinforced glass buzzed loudly. A guard stepped in, followed by a man shuffling in shackled feet. It took Clara a moment to truly recognize him. Marcus Sterling had always been a man of vanity. He spent thousands on facials, hair plugs, and personal trainers. But the man sitting down on the metal stool opposite her looked 20 years older. His skin was sallow and grey, deprived of sunlight. His once thick hair was thinning rapidly, revealing a scalp pale from lack of exposure. The orange jumpsuit hung off his frame, suggesting he had lost at least 30 pounds. He didn't look up at first. He kept his eyes on the scratched metal counter. "Hello, Marcus," Clara said softly. Her voice was carried through the electronic grate at the bottom of the glass. Marcus flinched. He slowly raised his head. His eyes, usually bright with calculation and arrogance, were dull and bloodshot. When he saw her, a flicker of something, shame perhaps or regret, crossed his face. "You actually came," he rasped. His voice was rough, unused. "I thought my lawyer was lying." "He said you wouldn't stop filing requests," Clara said, clasping her hands on the table. "He said you were becoming disruptive." "I just needed to know," Marcus whispered, leaning forward as much as the chain connected to the table would allow. "I needed to know if it was real. In here, you lose track of what's real." "It's real, Marcus." "The company?" he asked, a desperate hunger in his eyes. Does it still exist?" Clara nodded. "It does. But it's not Sterlo Dynamics anymore. It's Roots Technology." Marcus winced at the name. "Roots? Because of your father?" "Because of the foundation," Clara corrected. "We had a lot of work to do. The forensic audit took 3 months. You left a mess, Marcus. There were phantom employees, inflated contracts, the Ponzi scheme with the investors. It was rotting from the inside out." "I was fixing it," Marcus snapped, a flash of his old defensiveness appearing. "I just needed more time. The merger would have covered the holes." "The merger was a bandage on a gunshot wound," Clara said calmly. "We stripped it down. We sold the private jet. We sold the corporate apartments in London and Tokyo. We liquidated the fleet of luxury cars." Marcus looked pained. "My Porsche?" "Sold. The proceeds went to the employee pension fund you raided," Clara said. "We're profitable now, Marcus. Actually profitable. Not just on paper. Forbes ran a piece on us last week. They called it the turnaround of the decade." Marcus slumped back. "And you? Are you the CEO?" "I am the chairwoman," Clara said. "I hired a CEO, a woman named Elena, who used to run operations for Google. She knows how to manage people, not just manipulate them. I focus on the vision and the philanthropy." Silence stretched between them. The buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed deafening. "What about Jessica?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Does she ask about me?" Clara sighed. She had expected this. "Marcus, Jessica didn't even stay for your arraignment. The moment the handcuffs went on, she called an Uber." "She loved me," Marcus insisted weakly. "She loved the lifestyle," Clara said. "We found out she tried to sell a tell-all book about your private life to a tabloid. Our lawyers blocked it. She's back in Ohio now, living with her parents. She's working at a tanning salon." Marcus closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out, tracking through the grime on his cheek. The reality of his isolation was finally hitting him. The friends, the lovers, the sycophants. They were all gone. "I have nothing," he whispered. "I'm looking at 15 years, Clara. Maybe 20. I'll be an old man when I get out. If I get out." "You have time," Clara said. "Time to think. That's more than you gave my father when you refused to help him." Marcus looked at her, his expression crumbling. "I'm sorry. I know. I know words don't mean anything now. But I am. I was so afraid of being poor, Clara. I was so afraid of being like my parents that I became a monster. And now, I'm worse than poor. I'm a number." He looked at her through the glass, his hand pressing against it. "Why are you here, Clara? To laugh? To show me the suit? To tell me you won?" Clara reached into her leather bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed parchment. "I found this in my father's safety deposit box," she said. "It was wrapped around the deed to the land." She unfolded it and held it up to the glass so he could read the shaky handwriting of Henry Caldwell. "To my daughter. Justice is a hammer, and sometimes it must be swung. But do not let the hammer become your hand. A life lived in anger is a cage just as small as a prison cell. Win the war, my love, but then put down the sword. Plant a garden." Clara folded the letter back up. "I didn't come here to gloat, Marcus," she said softly. "I came here to let you go." "Let me go." "I've been carrying you around for 12 years, Clara said. "First as the husband I tried to please, then as the tyrant I feared, and finally as the enemy I wanted to destroy. But if I keep hating you, if I keep enjoying your misery, then I'm still trapped in this marriage. I'm still defined by you." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I forgive you, Marcus." Marcus stared at her, stunned. "You? After everything?" "I forgive you," she repeated. "Not for you. For me. Because I have a company to run. I have a life to live. And I can't do that if I'm dragging your ghost around with me." "Clara, wait!" Marcus pleaded, panic rising in his voice as he realized she was leaving. "Please just stay a few more minutes. I'm so lonely." "I deposited $5,000 into your commissary account," Clara said, ignoring his plea. "Buy some books, read. Learn something real. Goodbye, Marcus." She turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. "Clara!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "Clara!" The guard stepped forward, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder to restrain him. Clara didn't look back. The buzzer sounded, the door clicked open, and she stepped out of the visiting room. The transition was jarring. She walked from the dim, oppressive gray of the prison into the blinding afternoon sun of downtown Chicago. The air smelled of exhaust and hot pavement, but to Clara it smelled like oxygen. Archibald Thorne was waiting by the curb, leaning against the polished black Bentley. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, but he folded it neatly as he saw her approach. He studied her face carefully. "Did you get what you needed?" Thorne asked. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs. She looked up at the sky, watching a cloud drift past the sun. She felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Yes," Clara said, "it's done." "He begged?" "He did." "And you?" "I walked away." Clara smiled. "He's the past, Archibald. Roots is the future." Thorne opened the rear door for her. "I took the liberty of ordering some new equipment for the weekend. The hydrangeas at the Vermont cabin need pruning. And I believe the forecast calls for rain." Clara laughed, a genuine free sound that startled a few pedestrians. "Perfect," she said, sliding into the car. "I love the rain. It makes everything grow." As the Bentley pulled away, merging into the traffic of the city she now owned a piece of, Clara didn't look in the rearview mirror at the prison fading into the distance. She looked forward, through the windshield, at the endless open road ahead. Wow. I don't think Marcus ever saw that coming. It just goes to show that you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet or kind. Clara went from a discarded wife to a CEO in the span of a week, and she did it with class. What did you think of the $1 buyout scene? Would you have forgiven Marcus in the end, or would you have let him rot without a penny? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.
The air in the boardroom of Shaw, Weinberg and Associates was thick enough to be bottled and sold as a luxury poison. Seated at the head of a polished mahogany table, Preston Davenport, tech mogul and heir apparent, adjusted his $5,000 tie, a smug grin plastered on his face. Beside him, a woman named Kenzie Monroe, dripping in diamonds that were certainly not family heirlooms, ran a possessive hand up his arm. Across from them sat Preston's sister Catherine, her expression a mask of strained politeness. This wasn't just a meeting, it was the final act of a lifelong power play, the reading of their father's will. But no one in that room, especially not Preston, could possibly anticipate the meticulously planned grenade their deceased patriarch had left behind. A grenade the calm, unassuming lawyer was just about to roll across the table. The 36th floor of the Omni Tower offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel that Walter Davenport had helped build, and which his son Preston now looked upon as his birthright. Preston felt the familiar thrum of power in his veins. At 42, he was the CEO of Davenport Innovations, a company he'd steered into the stratosphere of aggressive tech acquisitions. He was handsome, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own manifest destiny. His father, Walter, had been old school, a man of handshakes, integrity, and quiet strength. He'd passed away 2 weeks ago, and while Preston had performed the role of grieving son with convincing solemnity, his mind was already allocating the vast resources of the Davenport estate. "Are we sure Garrett is coming? Some of us have companies to run," Preston announced to the room, his voice echoing slightly in the opulent space. He squeezed Kenzie's hand, a public display for his sister's benefit. Kenzie Monroe was 26, a former Instagram model who now curated a lifestyle brand. She was stunning in a severe modern way, her white blazer sharp enough to cut glass. She radiated an aura of victory, as if she had already won a competition no one else knew they were in. She leaned in and whispered in Preston's ear, "Don't worry, darling. Once this is all over, we'll take that trip to Monaco. Just you and me." Her eyes flickered towards Catherine, a tiny triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Catherine Davenport Price, Preston's older sister by 3 years, sat perfectly still. She was the opposite of Kenzie's sharp edges. She was soft-spoken, dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, her only jewelry the simple wedding band on her finger and her mother's pearl earrings. Her husband Robert, a placid university professor, sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. Catherine had always known who her brother was. She'd seen his casual cruelty, his transactional relationships, and his bottomless ego. Seeing him with Kenzie, this vapid caricature of a partner, at their father's will reading was a profound insult. She knew her father, a man who valued substance over style, would have despised everything Kenzie represented. The heavy oak door opened and Mr. Garrett Shaw entered. He was in his late 60s, with a neat silver hair and the kind of calm, discerning eyes that missed nothing. He had been Walter Davenport's personal lawyer and confidant for over 40 years. He carried a single, thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Preston, Catherine, my apologies for the delay," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded immediate respect. He nodded politely towards Robert and then let his gaze rest on Kenzie for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. There was no judgment in his eyes, merely observation. "Garrett, good to see you," Preston said, standing to shake his hand with practiced charm. "This is Kenzie Monroe, my fiancée." The word fiancé hung in the air. Catherine's back stiffened. Since when? Preston had been divorced for 5 years, a messy affair that their father had loathed, and in that time, he'd paraded a rotating cast of women like Kenzie through his life. Announcing an engagement now, here was a calculated move, a power play. Mr. Shaw's expression didn't flicker. "Ms. Monroe," he acknowledged simply, before taking his seat at the head of the table. He opened the portfolio, the crisp sound of paper turning the only noise in the room. "Let's begin," Mr. Shaw stated. "As you know, I am the executor of your father's last will and testament. Walter was very specific in his instructions, and it is my duty to see them carried out to the letter." He looked over the rim of his spectacles, first at Catherine, then at Preston. "And I do mean to the letter." Preston leaned back, draping his arm over Kenzie's chair. "Of course, Garrett. Dad was nothing if not thorough. Let's get on with it." He was already picturing the new wing on his Hamptons estate, the vintage Ferrari he'd had his eye on. The future was bright, shiny, and expensive. He had no idea he was standing on a precipice, and the man he saw only as a dusty old lawyer was about to give him a firm, decisive push. Mr. Shaw cleared his throat and began to read. The initial sections of the will were straightforward, almost mundane, a deliberate calm before the storm Walter had so carefully orchestrated. "I, Walter Jonathan Davenport, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." He detailed a series of bequests, a generous donation to the city's Historical Preservation Society, a scholarship fund for underprivileged engineering students at his alma mater, and substantial bonuses for his longtime household staff. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with the family for 30 years, was to receive a pension that would ensure she lived in comfort for the rest of her life. Mr. Henderson, the gardener who had taught a young Catherine how to tend roses, was given lifetime tenancy of his cottage on the estate grounds. Catherine smiled softly. These were the marks of the father she knew and loved, a man who recognized loyalty and quietly rewarded it. Preston, however, was visibly bored. He tapped an expensive pen on the table, a rhythmic, impatient sound that grated on Catherine's nerves. Kenzie was scrolling through her phone under the table, likely checking the engagement on her latest post. "Now," Mr. Shaw said, his tone shifting slightly, "we come to the disposition of the primary assets of the Davenport estate, including all properties, liquid assets, and controlling shares in Davenport Innovations." Preston sat up straight. The tapping ceased. This was the main event. Kenzie put her phone away, her attention now fully on the lawyer. Mr. Shaw continued. "Walter took great care in drafting this section. He wanted to preface it with a personal note, which he instructed me to read verbatim." He paused, looking directly at Preston and Catherine. He writes, "My children, my greatest hope was to leave behind more than just wealth. I hope to leave a legacy of integrity, a name synonymous with honor. Money can build a house, but only character can build a home. It is a lesson I fear I did not always successfully impart. Wealth without a moral compass is not a blessing, but a curse, a weight that will inevitably drag you and everyone you touch into the abyss. It is with this principle in mind that I have structured my final bequests. I do this not to punish, but to protect the family name and the company I dedicated my life to building." An uneasy silence fell over the room. The words were a clear indictment, and though they were addressed to both his children, the barb was clearly aimed at Preston. Preston's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He felt Kenzie's hand on his thigh, a small, reassuring squeeze that did little to quell the irritation bubbling inside him. His father was still lecturing him from beyond the grave. "Charming," Preston muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Catherine to hear. She shot him a warning glare. Mr. Shaw, pretending not to have heard, turned the page. "We will first address the matter of the Davenport family home in Greenwich and the summer property in Nantucket," he announced. "These properties, along with their contents, are to be left to my daughter, Catherine Davenport Price, and her husband, Robert Price, in their entirety." Catherine gasped. Robert looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise. The Greenwich estate was where they had grown up. It held every memory of her mother, of Christmases and birthdays, of her father teaching her to ride a bike on the long, winding driveway. She had assumed it would be split, or, more likely, that Preston would demand it be sold. "What?" Preston interjected, his voice sharp. "The entire estate? That property alone is worth $50 million. That's hardly an even split, Garrett." "Patience, Preston," Mr. Shaw said calmly. "Your father was methodical. As for the remainder of the estate, valued at approximately $900 million, including the controlling interest in Davenport Innovations, Walter has stipulated the following. The air crackled with anticipation. This was the real prize. The company, the dynasty. Mr. Shaw looked up from the document, his eyes locking onto Preston's. The remainder of the estate is to be divided equally between my two children, Preston Davenport and Catherine Davenport Price. Preston's relief was palpable. 50-50. He could live with that. He would buy Catherine out of her shares of the company within a year. She had no interest in running it anyway. He flashed a triumphant smile at Kenzie. They were set. 900 million split two ways. 450 million. He was already spending it in his head. However, Mr. Shaw added, and the single word sliced through Preston's euphoria like a razor, there is a condition, a binding, non-negotiable stipulation that applies to any beneficiary of the primary inheritance. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A condition your father referred to as the legacy clause. Preston's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wary suspicion. A condition? What kind of condition? He asked, his tone laced with impatience. He hated complications, and his father had been a master of them. Mr. Shaw adjusted his glasses and read directly from the will, his voice steady and clear. The legacy clause. It is my firm and unwavering decree that any beneficiary of the primary estate, as outlined above, must be in a stable, legally recognized marital union at the time of this will's execution. This union must be one founded on the principles of fidelity, honor, and mutual respect, the bedrock upon which I built my own life and this family. It is my belief that a person incapable of maintaining such a bond is incapable of responsibly stewarding the legacy I leave behind. The room fell silent. Catherine looked at her husband, Robert, a gentle smile touching her lips. They had been happily married for 12 years. For her, the condition was a mere formality, a beautiful affirmation of the life she had chosen. She felt a wave of love for her father, who had always admired the quiet strength of her marriage. Preston, on the other hand, was momentarily stunned. A marital union? He was divorced, unmarried. He felt a surge of hot anger. This was his father's final, pathetic attempt to control his life, to punish him for his divorce, for not being the docile, predictable son he'd always wanted. The old man was trying to box him in, but then the gears in his sharp, calculating mind began to turn. The clause was a problem, but every problem had a solution, a loophole. And his solution was sitting right next to him. A slow, predatory grin spread across Preston's face. He turned to Kenzie, his eyes gleaming. He stood up, pulling a suddenly confused Kenzie to her feet beside him. Well, Dad was always a step ahead, wasn't he? Preston announced, his voice booming with false joviality. He wanted his children to be in stable unions. A man of tradition. I respect that. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on Catherine, then Mr. Shaw. He was putting on a show, and he was the star. It seems my father's timing was, as always, impeccable. He must have known. Garrett, Catherine, I have an announcement to make. Kenzie and I were waiting for the right moment, after a respectable period of mourning, of course. But this seems fated. He took Kenzie's left hand in his grip firm. Kenzie Monroe, the love of my life, has done me the honor of agreeing to be my wife. We are engaged to be married. He beamed, a perfect picture of a happy, devoted fiancé. Kenzie, caught off guard but quickly adapting, produced a dazzling smile. She held up her hand where a massive canary diamond, a recent gift from Preston, glittered under the boardroom lights. Catherine stared at her brother, aghast. The audacity was breathtaking. The insincerity was a physical offense. She knew Preston didn't love this woman. He loved the way she looked on his arm, the way she deferred to him, the way she reflected his own success back at him. This was a lie, a performance designed to secure a fortune. Engaged? Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. Preston, you can't be serious. Never more serious in my life, sis, he shot back, his grin tightening. He turned his attention back to the lawyer. So there you have it, Garrett. I am, for all intents and purposes, fulfilling the spirit of my father's clause. My half of the inheritance is secure. He sounded so sure of himself, so utterly convinced that his cleverness had once again won the day. Mr. Shaw listened to the grand pronouncement without a single change in his placid expression. He did not seem surprised or impressed, or even convinced. He simply waited for Preston to finish his speech. When the silence returned, Mr. Shaw slowly folded his hands on top of the will. His gaze was calm, but there was a new, steely intensity to it. An engagement, Preston, is a promise of a future event, the lawyer said, his voice quiet yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Your father's will is concerned with the present. The clause is explicit. It requires a beneficiary to be in a stable, legally recognized marital union at the time of this will's execution. He let the words sink in. The spirit of the clause is not sufficient. The letter of the law is what binds us here, and the letter requires a marriage certificate, not an engagement ring. The trap had been sprung, and Preston Davenport, for the first time that day, realized he had walked right into it. The smug confidence on Preston's face evaporated, replaced by a flash of raw fury. He saw his $450 million, his new Ferrari, his absolute power, all begin to shimmer and fade like a mirage. The old man had outplayed him. That's preposterous, Preston boomed, his voice echoing in the suddenly tense room. It's an archaic, controlling stipulation. It can be challenged in court. I'm his son, for God's sake. You are free to challenge it, of course, Mr. Shaw replied, his tone perfectly even. But Walter's legal team and myself spent months constructing this will. It is ironclad. The morality clause, as it is often called, has been upheld in this state on numerous occasions when it is proven to be a core tenet of the deceased's firmly held beliefs. And Walter's belief in the sanctity of marriage was, as you know, unshakable. Kenzie, seeing the fortune slipping away, jumped in. But we are getting married. Next week, if we have to. We can go to City Hall this afternoon. She looked at Preston, her eyes wide with a mixture of panic and determination. Right, darling? Preston seized on the idea. It was a bluff, a desperate gambit, but it was all he had. Exactly, he said, forcing a confident smile back onto his face. This is a minor logistical issue, a matter of timing. We had a date set for the spring, a large affair. But for this, we'll expedite. As my fiancé, Kenzie is my partner. The will should recognize that. The will recognizes only legal documents, Preston, Mr. Shaw countered, his patience seemingly infinite. He was like a granite wall, unmovable and impassive. A marriage certificate, to be precise. Do you have one? We'll get one, Preston insisted, his voice rising. The will is executed based on the circumstances as they exist today, October 14th, 2025, Mr. Shaw said, tapping a manicured finger on the document. Not as they might exist tomorrow or next week. A heavy, suffocating silence descended. Catherine watched the exchange, her initial shock turning into a kind of grim satisfaction. Her father had known his son so well. He had anticipated Preston's every move, his every lie, his every attempt to bend the rules to his will. This wasn't just about marriage. It was a final, posthumous test of character, and Preston was failing spectacularly. Preston began to pace behind his chair, a caged predator. His mind was racing, cycling through a Rolodex of his high-powered attorneys, searching for an angle, a weakness. This is ridiculous, he snarled, pointing a finger at Mr. Shaw. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The old man's loyal dog, getting one last bite. I am merely executing my client's final wishes, Mr. Shaw replied, completely unfazed by the insult. My personal feelings are irrelevant. He paused, his gaze deliberate and heavy. The situation is quite simple, Preston. Catherine being legally married meets the conditions of the legacy clause. You being unmarried do not. So what does that mean? Kenzie asked, her voice trembling slightly. The diamonds on her neck suddenly seemed less brilliant. What happens to his share? Mr. Shaw looked at her, then back to Preston. According to the contingency provisions in the will, if a primary beneficiary fails to meet the conditions of the legacy clause, Their share of the estate is to be dissolved and redistributed. Preston stopped pacing. Redistributed? To whom? To Catherine. The idea of his sister getting the entire fortune was infuriating, but it was better than the alternative. No, said Mr. Shaw. Not to Catherine. He took a slow, deliberate breath, like a judge about to deliver a final, unappealable verdict. The atmosphere in the room grew cold, charged with a sense of impending doom. Preston, the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tenor. There is another reason this discussion about your potential marriage to Ms. Monroe is entirely moot. There is a far more significant and legally binding impediment. Preston stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? What impediment? Mr. Shaw leaned forward slightly, his calm demeanor finally cracking to reveal a sliver of the righteous fire beneath. His eyes, which had been passive and observant, were now sharp and piercing. The impediment, he said slowly and clearly, is that you cannot legally marry Ms. Monroe, or anyone else for that matter, because Preston, you are already married. The words hung in the air, electric and impossible. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The frantic ticking of an ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the room sounded like a drumbeat counting down to an execution. Kenzie was the first to react. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips, a sound of pure disbelief. What? That's insane. Married? Don't be ridiculous. He's been divorced for 5 years. She looked at Preston for confirmation, her smile faltering as she saw the color drain from his face. Preston stood frozen, his skin turning a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His mind, usually so quick and agile, was a maelstrom of denial and panic. It couldn't be. It was impossible. No one knew. No one. Married? Catherine echoed, her voice filled with confusion. To whom? We all went through the divorce with Charlotte. It was finalized years ago. Mr. Shaw reached into his leather portfolio. His movements were precise, unhurried. He pulled out a slim manila folder. From it, he produced a single official document, its crisp letterhead and embossed seal catching the light. I am not referring to his marriage to Charlotte Spencer, Mr. Shaw stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Preston. I am referring to your legal, current, and undissolved marriage to a Ms. Leora Donovan. The name struck Preston like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand gripping the back of his chair for support. It was a name he had buried, a secret he had locked away in the deepest, darkest vault of his life. Kenzie snatched the paper from the table. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she read it. It was a certified copy of a marriage certificate. The names were clear: Preston Alistair Davenport and Leora Sophia Donovan. The location: a small, obscure county clerk's office in Delaware. The date was 8 years ago, 2 years before his public, messy divorce from his first wife, Charlotte. What is this? Kenzie whispered, her voice cracking. Her face was a mask of horror and betrayal. She held the paper out to Preston, her hands shaking violently. Preston, what the hell is this? Who is Leora Donovan? Preston couldn't answer. He was trapped. The secret he had so carefully guarded, the lie that formed the very foundation of his curated public life, had just been detonated in the center of this room. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in on him. This is a forgery, he finally choked out, the words sounding weak and desperate even to his own ears. This is a lie. My father, he must have had this fake to ruin me. I assure you it is no forgery, Mr. Shaw said calmly. He gestured to the seal on the document. It is a legally certified copy, requested by our firm last month. Your marriage to Ms. Donovan is a matter of public record, however deeply you chose to bury it. It is valid, and it has never been legally dissolved. Catherine stared at her brother, a new kind of understanding dawning in her eyes. The secret trips, the unexplained financial withdrawals, the impenetrable wall he had built around certain aspects of his past, it all started to click into place with sickening clarity. Preston, you were married to someone else while you were still married to Charlotte? You committed bigamy? No, Mr. Shaw clarified. The timeline is more insidious than that. The marriage to Ms. Donovan on this certificate is dated 8 years ago. His divorce from Charlotte was finalized 5 years ago. This means for 3 years, he was legally married to 2 women at once. However, our investigations suggest the marriage to Charlotte had irretrievably broken down long before, and this secret union was the true cause. Kenzie crumpled into her chair, the marriage certificate fluttering from her hand onto the floor. The diamonds around her neck felt like a collar. She wasn't his fiancée. She was his mistress. Worse, she was the fool he was parading around while he had a wife hidden away somewhere. The public humiliation washed over her in a suffocating wave. All her smugness, her triumphant glances at Catherine, had been a pathetic joke. She had been the punchline all along. "Who?" Kenzie demanded, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "Who is she, Preston? Tell me." Preston's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He looked at his sister's disgusted face, at Kenzie's betrayed tears, and at the unwavering judgmental gaze of Garrett Shaw. The walls were closing in. The game was over. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he stammered, but the fight had gone out of him. He was exposed, his carefully crafted persona stripped away to reveal the fraud underneath. "Oh, I think I do," Mr. Shaw countered, his voice cold as ice. "Because your father, Preston, was a far more observant man than you ever gave him credit for. He had his suspicions for years, and 6 months before he passed, he hired a private investigator to find the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is far darker than a simple, secret marriage." Mr. Shaw reached back into his portfolio. This time he pulled out a much thicker file, bound with a rubber band. "Your father wanted to understand," he said, placing the file on the table with a soft thud. "Now, so will we all." The thick file landed on the mahogany table with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen from the room. It was not a legal document like the will. It was something else entirely. It was thick, slightly worn, and bound with a simple rubber band, giving it the mundane appearance of a case file, which only made it seem more sinister. The tab, marked in neat block letters, read, "Davenport, P. Personal Inquiry." Preston stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, coiled and ready to strike. The blood that had drained from his face now seemed to turn to ice in his veins. This was not a legal maneuver. This was an excavation, a digging up of buried things he thought were sealed in tombs of secrecy and reinforced with concrete walls of money. Mr. Shaw's movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he removed the rubber band and opened the file. The room was so quiet that the rustle of the first page turning sounded like a crack of thunder. "As I was saying," the lawyer began, his voice a low, dispassionate baritone that transformed him from an executor into the narrator of a dark and sordid tale. "Your father, Walter, was a far more observant man than you ever gave him credit for. He noticed things, inconsistencies, things a son believes a father is too old or too distracted to see." He looked up from the page, his gaze settling on Preston. There were the finances to start. Large regular cash withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for. Wire transfers to an opaque holding company registered in Delaware, a company with no stated purpose, no employees, no public footprint. Then there were your absences. Sudden business trips to Salt Lake City when Davenport Innovations has no interests, no partners, no clients in Utah. He worried Preston. At first he feared you were being blackmailed or had fallen into a gambling debt. He feared for you. Mr. Shaw paused, letting the ghost of a father's concern hang in the air before delivering the devastating truth. The reality, he discovered, was in some ways much crueler. 6 months before he passed, after a year of growing unease, Walter did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't solve. He sought the truth. He hired a man, a discreet and highly effective private investigator named David Chen. Mr. Chen's job was to provide answers, and he did. He slid the top page of the report across the table. It was a photograph, a high-resolution shot taken from a distance. It showed Preston, dressed casually, getting out of a rental car in front of a sleek, modern house, set against a backdrop of stark, beautiful desert mountains. He was carrying a bag of groceries. Mr. Chen began by tracing the holding company, which led him to this property in a remote corner of Utah. And that is where he discovered the reason for all the secrecy. He discovered Leora Donovan. Mr. Shaw then began to read from the typed summary of the report, his voice steady and clear, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of Preston's life. Leora Sophia Donovan, he began, is a computer scientist. Not just a computer scientist, but a generational talent, a prodigy in software architecture and advanced algorithmic design. Born in Kiev, Ukraine, educated at the top of her class. You met her 10 years ago at a tech conference in Berlin. At the time, she was a rising star, presenting a paper on a revolutionary data compression algorithm that was years, perhaps decades, ahead of anything else on the market. He looked directly at Preston, whose face was now a waxy, expressionless mask. You saw her genius, and you saw an opportunity. You didn't offer her a job, did you, Preston? That would have meant contracts, board oversight, intellectual property filings. You poached her. You approached her privately, promised her the world. A private lab, unlimited resources, a partnership. You convinced this brilliant young woman to abandon her career path, leave her home, and come to the United States on a work visa. A visa sponsored not by Davenport Innovations, but by your secret Delaware holding company. You told her work was too valuable, too revolutionary to be exposed to corporate rivals. You told her she needed to be protected. The story began to unfold, each detail more damning than the last. Leora, young and idealistic, had trusted him completely. She became the ghost in his machine, the secret architect behind the technology that had transformed Davenport Innovations from a successful hardware company into a billion-dollar tech behemoth. Catherine's eyes widened, a sickening realization dawning. She remembered years ago when Preston, then head of R&D, had suddenly unveiled the framework for the Synapse project. It had come out of nowhere, fully formed, its core logic so advanced that no one on the internal team could fully replicate it. He had claimed it was the result of years of his own private, intensive research. It was the single biggest success of his career, the one that cemented his status as his father's successor. And it had all been a lie. She was your secret weapon, Mr. Shaw continued, his voice laced with a quiet, righteous contempt. The Synapse data routing system, the flagship product that generates 60% of the company's annual revenue, was built entirely on the back of her algorithm. And you knew how valuable she was, too valuable to risk losing. So you devised a way to lock her down, to bind her to you in a way no employment contract ever could. You married her 8 years ago in that obscure clerk's office, telling her it was the only way to truly form a partnership, to protect her from the corporate world. You spun a tale of your ruthless father, your greedy wife Charlotte, a cutthroat board of directors. You painted yourself as her noble protector. Kenzie let out a small, choked gasp. This wasn't just a secret wife. This was the woman whose intellect was the source of all the wealth, the woman who had likely paid for the very diamonds on her neck. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a parasite feeding off a genius Preston kept in the dark. Mr. Shaw went on, detailing the meticulously constructed prison Preston had built for Leora. The house in Utah wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage. Mr. Chen's report is thorough, he said, flipping a page that contains satellite images and floor plans. He details her isolation. She has no social circle. Her contact with the outside world is almost entirely digital and routed through a server you control. The household staff are paid through the holding company and have signed ironclad, multi-million-dollar non-disclosure agreements. You controlled her finances, her immigration status, which was perpetually in process, and her access to information. You told her that your public life, your high-profile divorce from Charlotte, your string of vapid girlfriends, it was all a necessary charade, a performance to keep the press and your rivals from digging into your real life and discovering your most valuable secret, her. And for 8 years, she believed you. The investigator's file was chilling in its detail. He had documented Preston's visits once every 4 to 6 weeks, arriving late on a Friday and leaving before dawn on a Monday. But the final piece of the puzzle, the piece that had shattered Walter Davenport, was not a photograph or a financial statement. Mr. Chen placed the house under long-range surveillance, Mr. Shaw said, his voice grim. And 3 months ago, he captured a conversation you had with Leora in the garden. Your father listened to this recording. He had me listen to it. I believe, the lawyer said, his professional composure cracking for just a moment to reveal a flash of human sorrow. It was the thing that broke his heart. He slid a small digital audio recorder across the polished table. He wanted you to hear it too. Mr. Shaw pressed play. The audio was startlingly clear, the sound of crickets chirping in the background. Then a woman's voice, soft and melodic, with a distinct Eastern European accent tinged with a deep, aching weariness. Leora, audio. Preston, it has been 8 years. You said when the company was safe, when you were CEO, we could finally be together. You are CEO now. I am tired of hiding. I want to meet your sister. I want to go to a museum. I want a life. A pause, then Preston's voice, a tone he had never used in this room. It was intimate, placating, dripping with the smooth poison of practiced manipulation. Preston, audio. My love, my Leora, you know how complicated things are. The board is still unstable. My father is watching my every move. Just a little longer. We are so close. Your work is too important. Don't you see? Everything I do out there, it's for us, to protect us. Leora, audio. But you were photographed with that model, Kenzie. The papers say you are serious. Kenzie flinched as if she had been struck. Her name, spoken by this ghost of a woman 1,000 miles away, was a profound violation. Preston, audio. Kenzie? She's a distraction, a beautiful, empty-headed fool I use to keep the press from digging into my real life. My real life is here, with you. You know that. She means nothing. You are everything. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. Kenzie stared at the silent recorder, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated fury and humiliation. Empty-headed fool. She means nothing. The lie wasn't just that he was married. The lie was everything. Her entire relationship, the future she had so smugly envisioned, was nothing more than a strategic tool used to manage his real wife. She had been a human shield, and she hadn't even known it. Mr. Shaw carefully placed the recorder back into the file and closed the cover. The investigation was over. The verdict was in. Walter heard that, he said, his voice now cold as a winter grave. And he finally understood the full scope of your deception. It was never about protecting Leora. It was about controlling his most valuable asset. He created this will in the weeks that followed. He knew you would bring Ms. Monroe here today. He knew you would lie about your engagement. He knew you would try to cheat your way into a fortune you didn't deserve. This entire meeting was a stage, Preston, one designed by your father for one singular, heartbreaking purpose: to finally show everyone, including you, exactly who you are. The click of the audio recorder shutting off was deafening. It left a vacuum in the boardroom, a void that was immediately filled by the wreckage of Preston's life. The air, once thick with entitlement, was now choked with the toxic dust of exposed lies. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner no longer sounded like a measure of wealth, but like a countdown to oblivion. Kenzie was the first to move, but it was not the fluid, confident motion of the woman who had walked in. She rose from her chair with a stiff, jerky motion, as if her body was being forced to reanimate after a fatal shock. Her face, a canvas that had been painted with smug satisfaction just minutes before, was now a twisted mask of raw humiliation. The words from the recording, "a beautiful, empty-headed fool," echoed in the space, replaying in her eyes for everyone to see. She stared at Preston, but she wasn't seeing the powerful tech mogul, her ticket to a life of unimaginable luxury. She was seeing a stranger, a puppeteer, who had not only pulled her strings, but had mocked her for dancing. A choked, guttural sound escaped her throat, a cross between a laugh and a sob. "An empty-headed fool," she whispered, the words tasting like acid. "Is that what I am, Preston? Was I a fool for believing your lies? Or was I just a convenient piece of scenery for your pathetic double life?" He couldn't meet her gaze. His eyes darted toward the window, the floor, anywhere but at the inferno of fury he had ignited. "Kenzie, listen," he started, his voice a weak rasp. "No," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "You don't get to speak. I have listened enough. I listened to your promises. I listened to your plans for our future. All the while you were visiting your real wife, the brilliant woman you caged like an animal, the woman whose genius paid for this suit on your back, and this rock you put on my finger as a prop." Her movements became sharp, precise. With a look of sublime contempt, she pulled the massive canary diamond ring from her finger. It was a spectacular jewel, a beacon of wealth that had been her ultimate trophy. Now, it was a shackle. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, the light catching its facets, a miniature sun of pure deception. "You are a monster," she hissed, her voice low and trembling, with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "You didn't just cheat on me. You made my entire existence a lie. You made me the other woman to a woman you were simultaneously holding prisoner. There aren't words for what you are." For a moment it looked as though she might hurl the ring at his head. Instead, she did something far more devastating. She turned to the polished table, to the half-full glass of imported water that sat beside her, and with a gesture of final, utter dismissal, she dropped the ring into it. There was no dramatic splash, only a quiet, final plink. The magnificent diamond sank to the bottom, its fire and brilliance immediately distorted by the water, becoming a dull, pathetic glimmer, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. "Consider our engagement, our entire pathetic relationship over," she spat. Her eyes, now cold and hard as stone, flickered to Mr. Shaw. "Will this, all of this, become public?" The question was not one of curiosity, but of survival. The terror of a socialite facing a scandal of this magnitude was palpable in her voice. "A will of this nature, once executed, becomes a matter of public record," Mr. Shaw replied, his tone neutral but the implications clear. "The details will inevitably emerge." That was all Kenzie needed to hear. The blood drained from her face, replaced by a steely resolve. She would have to get ahead of this. Call her publicist. Craft a narrative. Become the victim, not the fool. Without another word, she snatched her Chanel purse from the table and stormed toward the door, her heels clicking in angry, defiant staccato on the marble floor. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a final, unappealable judgment. The silence that descended now was different. It was intimate, familial, and somehow far more damning. Preston, stripped of his mistress and his bravado, looked utterly adrift. He finally turned his gaze to the one person left in the room who shared his blood, his eyes wide with a desperation she had never seen before. "Catherine," he pleaded, his voice hoarse, the name a fragile thread cast across an impassable chasm. "Don't." Catherine's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air with the sharpness of surgical steel. She stood up, not with the explosive anger of Kenzie, but with a sorrow so profound it seemed to age her before his very eyes. She walked slowly around the table until she was standing over him, forcing him to look up at her. "Don't you dare say my name," she said, her voice trembling with a grief that had curdled into rage. "For my entire life, I have been your defender. When you were cruel to your friends in school, I told myself it was just ambition. When you bulldozed your way through your first marriage, I told Dad he was being too hard on you, that he didn't understand your passion. After the divorce with Charlotte, I told everyone you just needed time to heal. I made excuses for your arrogance, your affairs, your boundless selfishness. I thought it was just your character." Tears began to stream down her face, but they were not tears of pity. They were hot, angry tears of betrayal. "But this isn't a character flaw, Preston. This is a sickness of the soul. You didn't just hide a wife. You built a prison for a human being. You exploited her, isolated her, and stole not just her work, but her life. And you did it all with a smile on your face while you paraded women like Kenzie around to throw everyone off the scent." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a fierce, anguished whisper. "I know now why Dad looked so tired these last few months, why he seemed so distant. It wasn't just his heart condition, It was this. It was you. The knowledge of what his own son was capable of, it crushed him. He didn't die of a heart attack, Preston. He died of a broken heart. You killed him with your lies just as surely as if you had used a weapon. The accusation hung between them, brutal and undeniable. You are not my brother, she declared, the words like stones. The brother I knew, the little boy I grew up with, he's gone. Or maybe he was never there at all. I don't know who you are, but you are a stranger to me. She straightened up, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. She turned to her husband. Robert, we're leaving. Robert, who had remained a pillar of silent, shocked support, placed a gentle hand on her back and guided her toward the door. Before leaving, Catherine paused, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at Mr. Shaw. Thank you, Garrett, she said, her voice thick with emotion, for honoring my father's wishes and for bringing the truth to light. He would be grateful. The door closed gently behind them, leaving only Preston and the lawyer in the vast, silent room. The panoramic view of the city, once a symbol of his domain, now seemed to be a silent jury, witnessing his complete and utter downfall. So that's it then? Preston finally asked, his voice a hollow, defeated whisper. He looked like a man who had been flayed alive. I get nothing? That is not entirely accurate, Mr. Shaw said, his tone still perfectly measured. He retrieved the thick will from the table and turned to the final, meticulously crafted pages. Your father, even after learning the depths of your depravity, did not believe in utter destruction. He believed in consequences. He did not strip you of everything. Per the terms of his employment contract, you retain your position as CEO of Davenport Innovations. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited in Preston's eyes. The company. He still had the company. He could rebuild. He could survive. However, Mr. Shaw continued, extinguishing that flicker as quickly as it had appeared, I suspect that will be a very difficult position to hold. Your father also stipulated that a copy of this investigation and the terms of this will be delivered to every member of the board of directors this afternoon. Your professional future is now in their hands. Preston flinched, the hope dying completely. But as for the inheritance, the lawyer went on, his voice taking on a new final authority, your violation of the legacy clause has, as you now understand, triggered the contingency your father so carefully planned. Your entire $450 million share of the estate is hereby void. He paused, allowing the monumental weight of that loss to crush what was left of Preston's spirit. That entire sum, Mr. Shaw announced, a note of profound, righteous satisfaction finally entering his voice, is to be immediately and irrevocably transferred into a newly created trust, a trust your father named the Donovan Freedom and Innovation Trust. Preston's head snapped up, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. He gave it to her. He did, Mr. Shaw confirmed, looking Preston directly in the eye. Walter's final note on the matter was quite clear. He wrote, this money was generated by a genius my son kept in chains. Therefore, it is not his to inherit. It is a debt to be repaid. It is restitution for a crime against a human soul. The trust will be administered by this firm. It provides Ms. Leora Donovan with complete and unlimited financial independence for the rest of her life. It provides for the best immigration lawyers in the country to secure her citizenship and untangle her from the web of corporate entities you used to control her. And it provides for a permanent, professional security detail to ensure you can never, ever control or coerce her again. Mr. Shaw leaned forward, delivering the final devastating blow. Your father wanted to ensure Leora's liberation was immediate, which is why, Preston, as we have been sitting in this room, watching your world fall apart, a very different scene has been playing out in Utah. A senior partner from my firm, along with a trauma counselor and a financial advisor, flew there this morning. Right now, they are sitting with Leora. They have given her your father's personal letter of apology. They are showing her the evidence of your deception. They are telling her the truth, and they are telling her that she is free. While you have lost a fortune, she has just inherited one, along with the one thing you stole from her that is priceless: her future. The finality of it all was absolute. Preston Davenport wasn't just disinherited, he was erased. His father's legacy, his wealth, his power, it had all been meticulously redirected to the very person he had wronged so grievously. Walter Davenport's final act was not one of simple punishment. It was a masterpiece of restorative justice. He had empowered his son's victim on a scale Preston could never have imagined. Preston sat alone in the silent, opulent boardroom, a billionaire on paper, but a bankrupt man in every way that mattered. He was haunted now by the name of the woman he had tried to keep a secret, a name that, thanks to his father's final, brilliant act of checkmate, would now be etched into the Davenport legacy forever, eclipsing his own in a blaze of righteous triumph. In the end, Preston Davenport's empire of deceit came crashing down, not from a hostile takeover or a market crash, but from the quiet, posthumous wisdom of a father who valued integrity over inheritance. While Preston was left to face the public scandal and the shambles of his personal and professional life, a brilliant woman named Leora Donovan, once a ghost in the machine, was finally given the keys to her own future. She was not only financially secure beyond her wildest dreams, but she was free to claim her work, her identity, and her life. It's a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. And sometimes the most satisfying justice is not about revenge, but about restoration. What do you think? Was this the ultimate karma, or should Preston have faced even harsher consequences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of secrets, lies, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of payback, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you breathless. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible tales to light.